financial statements and everything like that, if you don't mind us going to that item first, get that out of the way, and then Mike can go home. Does that sound all right, Mr. Willett? Prayer. Okay, unfortunately, we've got some technical issues with the screen, and even though I've turned the computer off and on, it's still not working, so we'll have to proceed without it. There's a short agenda, so hopefully we'll be okay. Need anything explained, just sing out. It is 5:30, so if we could please stand. Acknowledgement of country, diversity commitment, service acknowledgement, prayer. City of Victor Harbor acknowledges the Ramangeri, Garangeri land and surrounding. We acknowledge their deep connection. By our respect, elders, respect is that on the people.
The City of Victor Harbor is committed to diversity, equity and inclusion. We respect people of all ages, abilities, genders, sexualities, religions, cultures, backgrounds.
We recognise the brave individuals who have served and continue to serve our nation. We remember those who have lost their lives, pay the ultimate sacrifice to our country.
Almighty God, we ask you to bless this country to be an agent of change. People of this city, direct and prosper its deliberations of the people.
Welcome everybody, and welcome to the gallery, and welcome to those that are listening online through our live streaming services. There are no apologies or leave of absence, so we go straight into, actually before we do, I'd also like to remind you of your requirements of disclosure of conflicts of interest. If you have a conflict of interest, you need to provide full and accurate details of that interest prior to the item. Item 4 is the business, and it involves our 2021-22 financial statements. The recommendation is that Council receive and note the annual financial statements reporting operating surplus of $1,119,000, unmodified audit option for both the financial statements and internal controls, noting that the draft documents were finalised upon receipt of the final auditor's certification. Would somebody like to move that way? Schofield? And a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor. Either of you like to speak to it? Councillor Kemp?
Yes, just, excuse me. Just a note of the operating surplus we achieved at 21-22, and there's some reasons around that, but also there's some other ongoing slight impacts, which are not great significance, but I'll ask Kelly Knight Stacey to give a bit of an overview of those impacts on our future operating budget from this through the audit meeting, which just highlighted a few little issues. I think Kelly can put some information around that. Yeah.
Director Knight Stacey, can you wait, please?
Thank you, through the chair. So the discussions in regards to the financial statements, there are a couple of anomalies that came up this year, including revaluation of transport assets, so roads, curb, footpaths, those type of assets. There was a marked increase of around $56 million, to the written down value of those assets, which are going to have an impact on this year's budget in terms of additional depreciation. So we will be looking to put back some analysis and a further report to council as part of the December budget review to provide the impact of that, which is potentially over at $1.25 million in additional and annual depreciation because of those revaluations. The other item was a discussion with our auditors around the replacement of our corporate software system, and the product that we have gone with may require a change in our accounting treatment. We're also putting together a report around that to bring back to council as part of the December budget review, which will come to council in February, but we're still working through those figures. But they are potentially some impacts on this current year's budget as a result of end of financial year transactions.
Thank you, Kelly. Is that all that you required, Councillor Kemp?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Jenkins. Just a matter of just getting give the chamber a bit of a warning what's coming, so it won't be a big impact when you see what the figures are, but certainly not as bad as we first thought, but certainly through what the staff are doing under Kelly's control is doing a fantastic job.
Thank you, and well done, Kelly, and your team. Does anybody else want to speak to this recommendation of receiving and noting the statements? If not, I'll put it to the vote. In favour? And those against? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. And I do apologise. I said I was going to go straight to Mike Willett, but I didn't. So if you don't mind turning to item 4.5, page 27 of your agenda, and I will read that out. I'll do the recommendations one at a time because they might require some discussion, and the second recommendation relates to finance. Can I also draw your attention to the budget implications where it says protocols on an estimated cost of $12,000, that is meant to be $1,000. So can you just delete that too? If you have a look, the second recommendation relates to the total budget not exceeding $1,000, and so by deleting that too, we've actually come back to the right number. That was drawn to my attention previously. So the first recommendation is that council reappoint Mr. Mike Willett as the City of Victor Harbor Town Crier in accordance with the terms of the honorary position of Town Crier, position description and protocols for a further 2-year period, commencing on the 10th of December and concluding on the 9th of December 2024. Would someone like to move that way? Councillor Henderson and then Angela Schiller seconding that. Do either of you want to speak to that? No? Does anybody want to speak to that? Councillor Schofield and then
Thank you. I support this recommendation. The amount of work that Mr. Willett does around the town in promoting us is incredible, really. I mean, $1,000 to support the work that he does to promote us is minor, and you only have to be down around the foreshore in the main street to see how people react to his presence and the amount of photos and that are taken of him. So I do support this recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Schofield. And just noting that the budget allocation is with the second recommendation. This first one is simply reappointing him. Councillor Burns, you wanted to speak to that?
Yes, thank you. I was wanting to move an amendment to the position description on point 3 to include in the role state and national gazetted events, and the other was point 14 to bury the terms by mutual agreement, which is in line with any normal HR contract.
I'll just check whether you're able to do that, given that that's not within the recommendation.
Okay.
But it may be that we are able to do that perhaps as a further recommendation.
That's fine.
So it may be that if we can't do that now, we may be able to make a further recommendation.
That's
But I
fine.
will check whether we can do that. That should be fine because it's within that first recommendation. So you can either do it two ways, Councillor Burns. If the mover and the seconder agree to it, then it can be done as a variation.
Okay.
If the mover and the seconder want to keep the recommendation exactly as it is, then you can do it as an amendment if you get a seconder.
Okay.
So a mover and seconder, can you, Stuart, can you just say what you want again?
Yes, I was just looking to amend 2 points in the terms and conditions of the position description. One was of the functions and community events that the town crier is invited by the council to attend includes state and national gazetted events. So things like Christmas, Easter and so forth are also included. It's implied, but I think it needs to be specifically stated. And the other was varying point 14, which is talking about the termination of the contract, the variation of clauses of the contract, where it is by mutual agreement. So it's really two separate bits rather than people might agree with one and not agree to the other. That's fine. So if someone wants to divide that into two separate amendments, I'm okay with that.
We can do that together.
Yeah, that's fine.
Councillor Henderson, you moved that.
I'm happy with that.
Councillor Schiller, are you happy with those changes?
That's fine.
Okay, so we can change that through variation as they're both happy with that.
Good.
You can't see that on the board, but we have added to the recommendation 1 that functions and community events that the town crier includes state and national gazetted events, and 14, variation of clauses by mutual agreement. Does anybody else want to speak to that recommendation? Carlos?
Yeah, I'd like to say that, you know, I think it's a very important asset to have this gentleman do what he does. It's just as much part of our history as the Cockle train, you know, the horse-drawn tram, you know, and the Granite Island Causeway, or was the Causeway. So yeah, I'd 100% support this. I think it's very important that we have this gentleman do what he does. And thank you for your service.
Councillor Quimbera. Councillor Kemp?
No, I'm fine, thank you. I've changed my mind.
Councillor Henderson, did you want to close the debate? No. Put that to the floor. All those in favour? And those against? That's unanimous. Congratulations in terms of reappointment for another 2 years. And I think, as you've heard from the council, your role is very important to us as a council, and what you do is appreciated by the community. We now go to recommendation 2, that council authorise the Chief Executive Officer to process reimbursement claims for out-of-pocket expenses incurred by Mr Willett as town crier to a total budget allocation of not exceeding $1,000. Move that way, Councillor Henderson. Aye. Carlos Quimbera. Do either of you want to speak to that?
As Councillor Schofield has already indicated, this is a very minor amount, and I'm sure Mr Willett does many things that are out of his own pocket as well. He is here, there and everywhere for us. He promotes our town both locally and interstate, and hopefully soon overseas. He'll be doing that as well. So $1,000 is a very minor cost to council for the service that he provides for us.
Thank you, Councillor Henderson. Councillor Quimbera, do you want to speak to this? No? Does anybody want to speak to this? If not, I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. The third recommendation, guidelines for informing the circumstances under which the services provided by the town crier might be called upon to give better effect to the position description and protocols document. Councillor Kemp. And seconding that, Councillor Quimbeiro. Do either of you want to speak to that? Councillor Kemp.
Is it right? Excuse me. Just a question first. With this guidelines, will they come back to chamber for us to have a look at?
That I'm sure they can do if the chamber would like them to come back. If you want to vary the motion for those guidelines to come back to the chamber to be endorsed.
Yes, I'll vary the motion with the added on the end and bring the guidelines back to the chamber for endorsement.
Are you happy with that, Councillor Quimbeiro? Okay. Do you want to speak to that?
I will.
Councillor
Thank you,
Kemp?
Mayor Jenkins. The reason why I feel that the chamber should look at these guidelines because in the commentary it talks about the effects of the town crier and his outfit may upset or concern other cultures, and I think we've got to get it right in the sense of we are a multicultural country, and we've got to be careful of what we put down in writing, as long as it doesn't affect other cultures too much. So I just want to make sure that the guidelines will be written, no doubt, in good terms, but I think from a chamber's point of view, I think we need to have a look at the guidelines to ensure it doesn't encroach on any of our cultures who live in Australia, not just maybe one which is referred to.
Thank you, Councillor Kemp. Councillor Quimbeiro, do you want to add to the debate? Is a seconder? No. Does anybody want to add to that debate? If not, I'll put it to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. Once again, congratulations, Mr. Willett. And the guidelines will come back to the chamber to... Oh, I'm sorry, there's no questions from the gallery. We now move to, we've done financial statements. We now move to back to 4.2, which is the annual report. And can I just say to administration, looking at the annual report, it's a very beautiful document that obviously a lot of work's been put into, and well done to the communication team and the staff that have been involved in that. I think every year it looks better. I am happy to do that recommendation on block if the rest of you are happy with that. Yes? All right. So the recommendation on block that council endorse the 2021-22 annual report, subject to the inclusion of the financial statements, and that council approve the submission of the report into the Australasian Reporting Awards. Can someone move that way, please? Councillor Schiller. And seconded by Councillor Henderson. Do either of you want to speak to that? Councillor Schiller? You might need to turn your microphone back on. Yep, that's it.
I'd just like to say, encourage anyone out there in the community to read the report, because it's very informative and it may give them a better perspective of how council is working. And it was a really great document, easy to read, and enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Schiller. Councillor Henderson, did you want to say anything? Does anybody want to say anything? Councillor Burns?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to move to amend that on page 35, 37 and 69, there's reference to the community satisfaction survey. And whilst all the wording is really good, I just thought it's probably important to note down that I've got the numbers of people that were invited to respond, but only 44 people responded. So the figures in there are reflective of 44 people in the community, which is only 33% to look at things like newspapers and so forth. But 44 is a very low number. I'd love to see the community respond a lot better going forward. But I just think it's important when you see figures that it actually states down the number of respondents. That's all.
Sure. Did you want to add that to the recommendation, the formal recommendation, or would you like council to note that and to fix it up?
Just to note it.
Just to note it and fix it up?
The rest of it's actually.
So,
correct.
sorry? Yeah, you can, well, that's right. It
Yeah.
doesn't need to be part of the formal recommendation, but you can do that. Lovely. Thank you very
Great,
much.
thank you.
Thank you, councillor Burns. Does anybody else have anything that they would like to add? Councillor Mackenzie? No? In that case, I'll put it to the vote, and that's the recommendation 1 and 2. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. We now move to 4.3, Victor Harbour Sport, Recreation and Open Space Strategy. Councillor Mann,
Happy to move that.
you're having to move that one, that first recommendation
On block.
on block. Is everyone happy for that to be moved on block? Yep. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Mackenzie. Do you want to speak to that, Councillor Mann?
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. Yeah, just a bit to add to this report and maybe some background as well. Caught up with Kathy Hayter, Director Hayter, today at lunch to just go through it a bit. And Director Hayter, please correct me if there's anything I say that's wrong or I miss anything. But just as a bit of background as to why this has come about and where we've been and where we're going. So we went through with the consultation to recently in the previous 12 months to look at who else could be a part of the Rec and Sport precinct in terms of the basketball stadium and the community facility that we were building. And part of that work and part of that consultation identified numerous community groups within our local community that had needs and had wants, but couldn't necessarily fit within that facility. It's not one that can satisfy everyone for all things. And so what this body of work, as I understand it, is the next stage in looking at all those other groups. And it's not just sporting clubs, it's recreation unit users, anyone who uses our open space, and what are their needs and what's putting together the existing consultation around what are their needs, what are the problems they're having, and more importantly, doing an audit of what we have, because as you could imagine, that we have plenty of open space and a lot of reserves that we're not necessarily entirely across how it's all being used and what standard it's required to be to. So my understanding of this strategy that's being developed is looking at what are the needs of all those other users and what do we have at the moment, and then helping to develop a kind of framework around how do we go forward, how do we help address some of the needs, how do we better utilise what we've got, because as we all appreciate, we do have limited resources, and how can we help clubs to achieve what they want whilst balancing using our current resources. So with the consultation from the initial phase, I understand that it's the consultation will mainly come in terms of the broader community response from once we've got this first draft of this strategy, because we've been in consultation heavily with our community already. So we're not just ignoring that. We're saying, yep, we've heard it. We're developing something to help address these concerns and looking at how we can better support all these other users of our many facilities going forward. But happy to address anything further in terms of questions. But that's why I think it's important, and I'm glad to see that administration and council's continuing to listen to all the other users out there.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. Councillor Mackenzie, you seconded the motion. Do you want to speak to it? No? Does anybody want to speak to it? Councillor Henderson, Councillor Schiller and Councillor Burns.
Yes, I believe we do need to have a strategy, overriding a strategy to look at all of the open space and all of the activities that take place in those open spaces. And yes, it is a good idea to go back to the community to see if there's anything in addition to what we all already have in our documents. This is something, as
Councillor Mann has pointed out, has been in discussion for a long time. And yes, one size does not fit all. There are many groups that fall outside of the strategy we have for the sports and recreation precinct. And it makes sense that the strategy is developed in parallel with the precinct planning. However, we already know some of the current gaps. These are some of those are listed on page 13, and a couple of those are the Victor Dragons, as an example, and the Little Athletics. Little Athletics are using a soggy oval at the primary school, and it's not fit for purpose. The Victor Dragons have been asking council for some land and a shed on which to store their dragon boats for many, many years. At least the 4 years that I was on the previous term of council, and I believe at least the 4-year period before that, if not longer. And so it's good to have an overall strategy, but I think once the results of this present strategy are finalised and the information is concluded in May 2023, I think this council should be aware that we need to be ready to act for some of these groups, because some of them have been waiting an awful long time. And I'm sure they're sitting out there listening to us saying, well, they're still in that chamber talking about it and still nothing is happening. It's time we actually made something happen for these people. So, yes, let's be ready to act and get some of these things happening for some of these groups. And let's get a timely outcome from this point on. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Councillor Henderson. Councillor Schiller, then Burns, and then I believe Councillor Quimberry, you also had your hand up. Councillor Schiller.
Is that on? Just making sure that we articulate to the community that although we've had a big focus on the sport and rec precinct, and to make sure that the other things like open spaces, reserves, those types of activities get a fair hearing, and that people in the community are aware that this is a strategy for those things, as well as the sports rec centre, and just the way the questioning goes, to make sure there's a broad sweep of questions on those other areas.
Thank you, Councillor Schiller. I think that's a good point. Councillor Burns.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to state that I agree with improving the sporting facilities for Victor. I think it's very important for our youth and families. However, it needs to be done properly and not rushed. I think the strategy is the right approach to actually understand what the entire community requires, and to align that with the current sports precinct strategy. More than likely, it will result in some changes, and I think that rather than running parallel, there are certain aspects of the current project we can continue with. There are other bits that should wait until the outcome of the strategy have been finalised, and we don't want to see any money wasted. We want to make sure that we get the right solution. If we rush into things or don't do it correctly, we can have issues down the road, like we found with the aquatic centre, and we want to avoid that. I would like to see a couple of amendments put in. It's only 3, and I'm happy to do that separately or talk to them now.
Do you want to amend recommendation 1 or 2?
I'm looking at a amendment to the attachment A on page 5.
We're not amending attachments. We can amend recommendations.
Okay. Then to amend recommendation 2, to add the words after outline of findings and before next steps, to include a comma, the financial analysis of forecast costs. So that taking into consideration, we are looking at the findings of the strategic plan, looking at the next steps, but also taking into account any financial analysis of forecast costs.
Just a moment. Thank you, Councillor Burns. I was just getting some advice in relation to that proposed amendment. Having that analysis of forecast costs and doing that financial analysis will have budget implications attached to it. And when we're talking about the next steps for the project, one of the next steps may be doing, once we know and we've finished the community consultation, once we know what we're looking at, then there will be certainly further analysis and budget analysis. So it may be too soon to put that in as an amendment, especially given that there's budget concerns with that.
And I'm okay with that as long as after we get the strategy, but before we proceed, that we still look at things like cost benefit and also risk analysis as well.
I'm sure that will come back to at the next stage, it'll come back to the Chamber for endorsement, and there will be. Okay, thank you. So you're happy to withdraw that amendment?
Yes, correct.
Councillor Quimbeira?
Yeah, I'd just like to say that, you know, I understand that the sporting complex is well overdue. I'm not against it. As the only builder on site here, I deal on a daily basis with spiralling costs, and if we're not careful, we keep adding things to this project, we're going to not be able to deliver it because it's just going to be too expensive. So we've got to be really open and honest with the community what we can actually deliver, because that's the main thing, is to make sure this gets across the line. So I guess once we get further down the process, where we get some plans and things like that drawn up, I'll have a better understanding of costings per square metre. But like I said, I've just priced up a 60-bedroom nursing home for $16 million, which was actually started off at 18 months ago. So I'm sort of, and the figures I've seen here is 40 million. Is that correct? What we're talking about in the report I read?
I'll just ask.
An estimate, 40 million?
Kathy?
Thank you. Through the Mayor, that's the price for the precinct development? Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Not the
Okay.
strategy itself.
No, that's all right. So I guess once I have a look at the plans and what's actually within that project, I'd better be able to assess and put my eyes over it as a builder, commercial builder. So, yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Quimbeira. Just a reminder that the report that we're looking at is in relation to the sport and recreation and open space strategy. It's not specifically concerned with the sport and recreation precinct. This is a much more broad strategic look, but I think your advice is very timely as well. Does anybody else want to speak to this? Councillor Kemp?
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. Look, I think it's a good concept. We need to develop a strategy to look at the other aspects of what's not already in place in Victor Harbor and how we can use our open spaces. One of the things I'm a little bit mindful of, that when we go out to stakeholder consultation and get their feedback, you know, it's got to be a very clear message that we are looking at the community needs, not the community wants, because the wants is a wish list and it costs money, but the needs are important for our community. So hopefully the strategy works down the pathway of the needs of the community, not so much the wish list or the wants of the community. We could define that a little bit better in our process, how we go about it. That way we'll get a true report about what the community needs in the area of this open space and the sports and recreation for our community overall.
I think that's also a good point, Councillor Kemp. Thank you. I know that when I was asked to visit Little Athletics last week, I had to cancel 2 lots of programmed activities because of the flooding on the Little Athletics track, and they certainly have a need for a track because they have, you know, over 400 families that belong to them. Anybody else like to speak to this? If not, I'll ask Councillor Mann to close the debate.
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. Yeah, I guess just in closing, I think one of the main concerns I had raised with Director Hayter was around the messaging of this, and I think some of that's a little bit blurred in some of the debate, but really what we're talking about is two very separate things between this rec and open space strategy and then our new sporting precinct with basketball and gymnastics. That work's still ongoing, and I look forward to our briefings on that and the seeing all the work that's been happening in that space. But what this report and what this strategy is talking to is all those other groups and users and people in our community who weren't included in that precinct, but still gave us a lot of support, a lot of consultation throughout all the existing consultation we've done. And this is to say, yep, we want to work with you. We want to develop something. We don't want to exclude you from the broader picture of satisfying your needs in terms. It's an important work, but I think we need to be really clear around the messaging between the two projects and how they work together. So happy to support this one.
And I'll now put that to the floor as you close the debate. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. We now move to the Victor Harbour Visitor Centre and the Coral Street Arts Space operating hours. I'm happy to do those recommendations en bloc if people are happy for that. Can I just have a nods or show of hands if you're happy for it en bloc? Yep. In that case, I'll put someone like to move the recommendation en bloc. Angela, Sheila, you happy to do that? Thank you. And seconding that, Councillor Henderson. Councillor Schiller, would you like to speak to that? Councillor Henderson? Does anybody want to speak to that? Councillor Kemp?
Thanks, Mayor Jenkins. Just got a question. Considering we are deciding on the hours of operations of these centres, when will the goods shed be open? And when will this take effect?
Perhaps Kathy Graham.
Thank you, through the Mayor. Good question, Councillor Kemp. We have just passed our fire water test, the inspection. So as you know, that was a big thing for us to get past. So we have just passed that last week, final inspection tomorrow. And we expect then that all works will be finished and it will be ready to open very soon. So we have no further building works to do, and it's really when Graham's team are available to sort out all of what they need to sort out.
Have we got a date?
Through the Mayor, yeah, correct. Once we, our team are mobile, my team's mobilising at the moment in terms of moving in, shifting the things that it needs to out of both storage and the Coral Street Art Space to bring back into the centre. We haven't been able to do too much of that yet. That'll occur over the next 10 days or so. So we're aiming, I think it's about the 12th was the opening date, give or take a day. I can't quite remember off the top of my head. I can pop it in the update at the end of the week, perhaps.
Thank you very much. That'd be great. Thank you, Councillor Kemp.
And a secondary question, if I may. On the budget side, are we within budget, under budget, going over budget? Or the other part of the question is around, is there any more expenditures required to finish off the project in the way of decking it out, buying new furniture and all those fit outs fees inside the building? Or will they be covered by the current budget? A little bit confusing, but.
Through the Mayor, by and large, everything's already covered and purchased. There may be a few small items that we move in and still need to work through, but that's covered under the current budget as well. There'll be no need for further budget. And whilst I've had the opportunity, I might just clarify the opening date. It is in the report, actually. 14th of December is when we anticipate opening to the public.
Thank you. And that certainly will be a day of celebration. I know that the volunteers have been really stretched and tried during this time. It's taken a lot longer for a whole lot of different reasons, and really look forward to seeing the visitors centre open in that shed. Be great. Does anybody else want to speak to it? Councillor Schofield?
Yes, look, I just have one question on the opening hours, 10 till 4. I mean, this is a visitors information centre. Visitors are in Victor Harbour earlier than 10 o'clock, and they certainly are in Victor Harbour long after 4 o'clock. And this is what we find at the horse tram. So I'm just wondering why 10 to 4. I thought it might have been open a little bit longer.
Through the Mayor, granted, there's certainly some visitors about before 10. It's not when most of the action happens in the BIC, so to speak, in terms of that direct customer interface, and also after 4. It's a case of trying to find that balance between servicing the visitors that are coming through the door, but also focusing on the digital side of things and the electronic, the online presence that has certainly come to the fore as a result of this transition to the new model of services. So it's enabling that staff have time freed up to be able to do that element of the work as well. So it's really a case of finding that the balance.
If any members wanted to amend that to a different time that you're more comfortable with, that's something that you could do. I would suggest 10 to 5, but especially in the summertime, 10 to 4 in winter, I think. But that's up to the elected body. I'll be guided by you. Councillor Quimbera?
Yeah, I'd agree with Councillor Schofield. I think the personal contact when it comes to someone talking to you about the town that you're in, I find is always a lot better than just reading about it on the internet. So I would, definitely recommend that we open up a little bit later. Obviously, there may be budgetary constraints, but something we could always look at.
I'll ask Director Pathouse about those budgetary constraints if opening for an extra hour in summer does have what that budget impact would be, and then you can make up your mind how you'd like to move that way.
Through the Mayor, we'd absorb it within the current staff resources that we've got. And sorry if I outlined it incorrectly, but when I'm talking about it's the media content, the work on the media content, not dealing necessarily with internet inquiries. That happens during the course of the day or dealing with people online. It's really making sure the content is up to date and fresh and modern and every day's different, every day's new to make sure that presence online is very much a part of what we do, which is what this new model is all about. But certainly if there was a need to stay open longer, we do find, and the report does outline that, no visitors will be turned away. If someone, comes in at 5 to 4 or 4 o'clock, or if they're already in the centre, they'll certainly be serviced during that time. No one will be turned away. That happens at the moment if someone walks in at 5 o'clock, and sometimes we get delayed for quite some time. It's probably more that becomes problematic for resourcing, because it does start pushing our staff into after hours times.
Be guided by the chamber. Councillor Schiller, you opened it. If you speak again, you'll be closing the debate. So I'll just wait until the others. Councillor Kemp, you've spoken. Councillor Mann,
I thought I asked questions.
You've got a question?
I thought I asked questions, not so much spoke to it.
I took that as speaking to it. But
I have a question then.
You have a question?
Considering the fact that the third recommendation talks to the fact that the CEO can vary the operating hours, which is on demand. So I don't think we need to change the hours as they are. I think we let the CEO do her job.
That relates to Coral Street only, Councillor Kemp. But you could change it to the hours of Coral Street if required, and Victor Harbour Visitor Centre. If somebody wanted to amend that way, I'll go with the chamber. Councillor Mann?
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. Yeah, no, I'm happy with the opening hours as they stand in the report. I think maybe after 4 p.m. we can look at putting a gin bar in there or something of that nature to activate the space into the night. But yeah, for now,
It's the best idea I've heard all week.
purpose of this, I think it's okay.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. Councillor Henderson?
I have a question
You
because
have-
it's a question.
It's a
I chose
question.
not to speak. My question relates to volunteers and particularly with reference to the Coral Street Art Space because we are short of volunteers for that space per se. And I'm wondering where the idea or the suggestion that I made earlier in the year has got to in terms of a recruitment drive in some way for volunteers across the board because we're down in many areas. I just can't remember if that had budget implications or not. I've forgotten.
I will allow your question, Councillor Henderson, but can I remind you that questions and also when people are speaking, it needs to relate to the recommendations. Yours are slightly off the recommendations. We're not discussing volunteers, but given the shortness of the meeting and that it is a little bit related, I will allow it. Graham?
Through the Mayor, and I do recall Councillor Henderson raising that earlier, we have been holding off on a recruitment drive until we were certain about when things were going to happen. And I mean, recommendation 3 with respect to the Coral Street Art Space anticipates that through a recruitment drive, we'll be able to harness some more volunteer energy into the space and be able to open for longer hours, hence the request for the delegation to the CEO to be able to do that. So we can respond as the ability for us to do that comes to fruition. Generally speaking, across the board, council does a recruitment drive, so to speak, if I can use that terminology, for volunteers, and there are some processes to go through. It's probably been done one, but we are probably well due for one. And it is an outstanding resolution at the moment.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to speak to the 3 recommendations? You'll be closing the debate, Councillor Schiller. Councillor Schiller, would you like to close the debate?
As it stands at the moment with the hours at 10 to 4, I think is worth trying at that. And obviously because the hours can be changed, if we monitor how things go, particularly through the summer period, and if we're finding that there's a lot of people coming in after 4, well then we've obviously got the ability to push that up to 5 o'clock. I think we could leave it from 10 to 4 at the moment and make that change on the run.
Thank you, Councillor Schiller. That closes the debate. I now 1, 2 and 3 on block to the floor. All those in favour? And those against? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. We have dealt with 4.5, the renewal of the town crier appointment report. And being there are no confidential items. Being a special council meeting, there are no motions on notice or questions or motions without notice. So at 6:20, we have the end of the council meeting. Congratulations. I think that's the earliest one we've ever had. Councillor Henderson did say beforehand, it's going to be an hour. And I said, no, give it 2 hours. So you've won. And that was great debate, people. That was really, really good debate and really good discussion. Thank you very much to the gallery and thank you for those listening online.